So I will get us started here with an overview if we want to go to the next slide. So this is our schedule for the morning here. As I mentioned, we'll start with a quick overview and introduction of what the purpose of this workshop is, who Throwe Environmental is as a group and why we're here supporting the program. And then we'll go into a series of different sessions. The first one's going to be an overview of the Chi-Cal Rivers Fund program. So we'll get kind of the basics of what that program does and does not fund, where it operates, the timeline, very basic pieces of information. And then in the second session, we will do a deeper dive into some specific components of a proposal narrative. So things that you can do to make a good first impression to the folks that will be reviewing your application, as well as different pieces of information that you might want to work in throughout the narrative to make sure that that good impression lasts as folks begin to conduct their reviews. Oops, can we go back one slide? There we go. We're going to take a short break around 10:45, and then we'll come back for 2 other sessions. The third one will be about, we're calling it the 3 M's, metrics, monitoring, and maintenance. So the more technical pieces of your proposal. And then the last session will be focused on budgeting, financials, and match. So we'll talk about all of the financing components of your application. After those sessions, that'll kind of give you a taste of the different topics we're going to cover for the day. We'll have 3 breakout rooms that will mirror the topics that you've heard throughout the day. And then you'll be able to go into those breakout rooms, talk one-on-one with some of the NIFWF staff and the field liaisons from Throwe to ask specific project questions, related to the geography that you're working in, your specific project idea, the budget or the match situation that you're working with, your organization. So we can really get in the weeds during that last portion of breakout sessions. And then we will wrap up by noon and you will be free to go. So that's the run-up show for the day here. If we can go to the next slide, I just want to go through some more logistics. So as I mentioned, the purpose of this session is really to look at funding tips and best practices in a funding environment that really is changing rapidly. There have been quite a few changes this year at the federal and state level, that have affected funding across the country. So now more than ever, it's important for folks to understand what they can do to be as competitive as possible when it comes to submitting applications for funding. And that includes applications to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. The focus today will be on NIFWF's Chi-Cal Rivers Fund, which is one of several programs that operate in the Great Lakes region. But the takeaways really can be applied across all NIFWF programs in the Great Lakes and beyond, as well as other federal funders, state funders, and philanthropic funders as well. So take what you can out of this. If there are pieces that are useful to you, take that with you. Pieces that you feel aren't as useful, discard that and keep moving on. Really, this is meant to be as productive as possible for folks listening today. And it is also meant to be interactive. So we're going to take breaks throughout each of the sessions. In the meantime, you can put questions in the chat, but we will have a short Q&A period between sessions where folks can unmute or use the chat to ask questions and we can get into a bit of a discussion. When you're not speaking, we do ask that you stay on mute, but when that time comes, you're welcome to, again, raise your Zoom hand, unmute, or use the chat to ask a question. We are recording right now. We will be throughout the day, not the breakout rooms, just the main presentation. And the recording and the slides will all be shared at the end, probably within the next day or so after it processes through Zoom. So to get us started here, to kind of get the ball rolling with some hopefully good engagement throughout the day, we're asking you to just put your name, the organization that you work for, and the state that you work in the chat. So we'll give folks a second to do that here. We'll probably see several states in common and many organizations that know each other, knowing that this is a small geography that this program operates in, which is good. You've got friends and potential partners on the call. So as folks are putting names and organizations in the chat, feel free to scroll through and see who else is joining you. In the meantime, we can go to the next slide and I will get us started here with our, that's right, we've got the overview of Throwe first. So I just want to give a little bit of a background on who Throwe Environmental is as an organization before we jump in. So we're a small consulting firm based out of the Northeast, based in Rhode Island. And we work nationally, including with several different NIFWF funding programs to support folks specifically on funding and financing related to community resilience. So that happens in a lot of different ways. We work on climate action plans with communities. We help think through innovative and sustainable investment and financing systems. And then for our NIFWF work and for some other work and technical assistance projects across the country, we get in the weeds with applicants and we help think through how they can pursue funding for their projects and how they can be as competitive as possible in doing so. So with the Great Lakes programs for NIFWF in particular, we are promoting Great Lakes grant programs through outreach. We're meeting with applicants one-on-one or in workshops just like this to talk about the funding opportunities and to answer any questions that folks have. We'll provide direct technical assistance and follow-up on projects that either have been moved forward for funding or those that have not been, that have been declined during a given year. And we'll think through maybe what went wrong and what could be improved upon for future rounds of funding. And then for folks who have been funded by NIFWF, we also troubleshoot any problems that those individuals are having with their grant and help them work towards successful execution of the grant. So Throwe works across the entire country, but we've got different hotspots. New England and the Mid-Atlantic tend to be hotspots for us, but more and more lately we are up in the Great Lakes, which has been super fun. And this whole contract with the Great Lakes grant programs at NIFWF has been a foundational piece of that. So we're excited to be here and excited to help folks as they look to apply for this program. And all right, so now we can go to the next slide. And thanks for everyone putting their names and organizations in the chat. I see we've got plenty of those coming in. I want to get us started here today, and I'll pass it over to my colleague Max Satineri in a second. He is going to be giving an overview session on the Chi-Cal Rivers Fund. So we'll go through again the basics on this program and some of the key pieces that you need to know to quickly decide whether or not this is the program for you. I imagine several folks on the call have already seen some of this information, so they know it's of some interest to them. But here we'll put forward some specific pieces that are unique to the 2025 RFP and answer any questions about eligibility and scale of the program this year. So Max, I will turn it over to you.
Awesome, thanks Kyle. All right, so yeah, we can dive on in to an overview of the Chi-Cal program. So Chi-Cal is administered by NIFWF, and it is unique. It leverages federal funding with private sector contribution. So you can see in this call-out box on the right, there's a range of federal funders such as EPA, Fish and Wildlife, and the Forest Service, whose funding is combined with private sector contributions from foundations and corporate entities. And the focus of the program supports projects along the major waterways of the Chicago and Calumet region in southeastern Illinois and northwestern Indiana. So who's eligible for Chi-Cal? A range of organizations, so nonprofits, state governments, municipal governments, tribal organizations, and educational institutions are all eligible to apply. Folks who are ineligible include federal agencies, for-profit businesses, and unincorporated individuals. And the geographic focus of the program is shown here. You can see in the map on the right-hand side. For projects to be eligible for funding, they must occur in close proximity or otherwise have direct benefits to the major waterways of the Chi-Cal system and their tributaries. So yeah, this map on the right shows some of those major waterways and their tributaries where projects are eligible for the Chi-Cal program. And Chi-Cal supports projects in three main funding categories. The first category, enhancing the quality and connectivity of fish and wildlife habitat. So these are projects that support riparian, in-stream, upland and wetland habitat improvements along the major waterways of the system that we just talked about. The second funding category, expanding and maintaining nature-based solutions to improve stormwater storage. So these are projects that support nature-based solutions that capture and store stormwater, reduce runoff, address combined sewer overflows, limit basement backups and flooding. So yeah, competitive projects in this category support the installation or the maintenance of nature-based projects that address stormwater. And then our third funding category is activating restored habitats and natural areas through public access improvements and community engagement. So this funding category supports grants that activate these restored habitats and natural areas, invest in long-term stewardship, public access, engagement programs, all with the goal of helping people get out in nature. So applicants have to pick one of these priority categories, but aspects of your project can also include things that might fall under another category, but you have to have one priority area. And now the general timeline of the program. So the RFP for the Chi-Cal was released on June 9th. Today is July 9th, so we're holding that TE virtual workshop that you see down there on the bottom right. Full proposals are due by 11:59 on July 30th at the end of the month, and targeting late November, early December for the announcement of awards.
Awesome, thanks, Max. Why don't we go back one slide here and just stay on this for a moment while we see if folks have any questions on either the general timeline or any of this kind of broad overview information they saw to get us started. And if you do have questions, again, you can put those in the chat, raise your hand or unmute. It's a small enough group where we can go through these one by one. All right, start to come in here. We've got our first one. Can you touch on the timeline for when award agreements will be finalized? Max, do you want to cover that one or should
I? You can go for it.
Okay, yep. So typically when NIFWF tends to announce awards later in the calendar year. So we're usually looking at November or December for NIFWF award announcements. But then there's a short period of actually finalizing those awards before things start to roll out administratively. So we'd be looking at announcements by the end of the year, and finalization will likely start to happen at the beginning of the following calendar year.
Yeah, and Kyle, I can jump in a little bit and add some more information there. So the grant agreement completion timeline can take, I would say, a month to several months, depending on how complete the original proposal is as submitted. So the more complete your full proposal is when you submit it, usually the faster the grant agreement is, the grant agreement completion is. And then also keep in mind that some of our projects do have federal funding. So along with that, you're also going to have to go through some federal regulatory compliance processes, including NEPA, ESA, NHPA, et cetera. So that's something we can talk about at the end of this workshop if anyone has any specific questions, but that's a really good question.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tracy. I would tell folks too, if you do have specific questions on that, if you're worried about any compliance pieces, that's definitely a topic to bring up in the breakout rooms, and we can go through those specifically. Another question here, a good one. My project would fall into either of the three categories. How can I choose my best category? I might actually save this one. This, I think, is quite a bit of what Sally will be touching on in the next session when she focuses on narrative. She will go through the different components of each category. And I think as folks start to see that, they're going to see where their project may be a better fit in which category. But it could be the case that proposals or projects that you're putting forward do fit into multiple. And then you really want to think strategically about where you feel like you can make the best sell to the reviewers, and where you can have the greatest likelihood for success. There certainly can be some overlap, and you can have multiple co-benefits. That's a good thing. But there does have to be one kind of primary benefit that you select as part of the application. Another question here about the match. Will the amount of match contributed be included in the scoring of proposals? That is a piece that is considered as part of the evaluation criteria, and we'll talk about that more in the budgeting section. It's part of it. It's not the only part of it. So, take that as one piece of information that reviewers will look at as they're reviewing your application, scoring it against, all of the pieces that are in the RFP, all of the additive things that you're bringing to the table. It's one component of the larger evaluation criteria. So it will contribute to the score, but it will not be the only thing.
And I wanted to just jump in and add, in addition to Kyle's spot on comments, if you feel like match is a limiting factor for your proposal, apply anyway. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be the thing that says yes or no one way or the other. It's not a requirement. It is something we look at in terms of cost effectiveness, partnership buy-in, those type of indicators, but it is not. It should not be a go no go signal for your project.
Yeah, that's a great point, Aislinn. And I would say that's the case, at least from our perspective at Throwe, what we've heard across several different NIFWIF programs and regions across the entire foundation. So that's not even just for the Shycock Rivers Fund. If there are other NIFWIF programs that you're looking at that you're unsure about because of match requirements, apply anyway, as Aislinn said, or at the very least, reach out to the program staff and have that conversation. All right, well, it looks like we've slowed down with questions here. If folks have any others, feel free to put those in the chat and we can get them during the next Q&A portion. But now I will turn it over to Sally, who's going to give us a deep dive into the specifics of this program when it comes to the narrative and the different components that make up your proposal.
Thanks, Kyle. So yeah, we're going to work on building a strong proposal narrative from first impression to last. So what are the key components to focus on and how to carry that story through so you make a strong impact and impression on the reviewers. So there's many components of a strong proposal. Some of you may be familiar with these components in the past. In order to set up your narrative, you're going to be developing a title, an abstract, a proposal description. All of that's going to be reflected in your budget and your metrics and metric notes. We just discussed the match and how that plays in, and you're also going to need a project map. And so in this particular section, we're going to focus on the narrative in particular. And again, this is meant to try to be relevant to grant proposals across NIFWIF and also other funding sources. So hopefully this will be helpful for other opportunities also. So we want to definitely focus on the problem and the solution, kind of set the context for what we're going to offer as our solution in this proposal. We want to show that there's technical merit, that we have the capacity to do the program and connect with the right partners to show that we're going to be successful. We definitely want to align with the program goals, the Great Lake program goals. Applicant qualifications, we want to see that you have the ability to do this work with the budget that you've given and through your partnership and what expertise you're tapping into. The work plan, you want to make sure your timeline's clear and the roles are clear. And you'll definitely have opportunities to expand on some of that when you're doing the budgeting and you're writing your budget notes to help make it clear of what particular people are doing in what roles. Your partners are very important and also contribute to the success of local buy-in and also thinking about the project as something that can be moved forward and continue in time, and how partners can play into that role. And of course, community engagement is always something that the Fish and Wildlife Foundation wants to do. And you want to make sure that communities are engaged in meaningful ways. And letters of support are always key to showing that buy-in and excitement around doing a certain type of project and how that fits into other projects that are going on in the region or larger, tackling larger questions. Next. So for all of the Chi-Cal project categories, you should be advancing the goal of the Great Lakes Business Plan, which sets forth priorities in terms of how conservation, restoration, and engagement is done. You must demonstrate the capacity of experience commensurate with the scale of the project. So make sure that you have the right workforce, the right people for what you're asking for to get done. You want to report your accomplishments in terms of metrics, which a lot of you are probably familiar with. And Max will be talking more about that in detail later. And it doesn't have to be a lot of metrics, but you want to pick meaningful metrics. And pick from categories that you feel you can clearly show some results for. You must address operation and management needs for at least 5 years after completion. We want to know kind of how this is going to go forward. How is success going to be maintained so that it's not just a one-off, and it's a real investment in the landscape. As we talked about before, match is not required, but it's encouraged. And the grant sizes range from 150,000 to 400,000 generally. That's the range to be thinking about. Next. Okay, so we're going to dive into a little bit more about what kind of projects can be funded. And I wanted to include this in the narrative section because it's important to kind of from the get-go be clear about what your main purpose is and how you can reflect that and how you're structuring your narrative. So you may have a habitat and a stormwater project, and you want to kind of talk about, given the impacts and the outcomes that you think you're going to have, what's the primary focus of it, and how can you incorporate other parts into that to show that it has multiple benefits. And there is a lot of overlap between these categories, and I think a lot of people have questions on how to do that. So hopefully we can share some information here and talk about that in the breakout rooms. So as Max mentioned in the introduction, we're looking at for fish and wildlife habitat quality and connectivity. We're looking at riparian, in-stream, upland, and wetland habitat improvements along or near major waterways. We're looking for projects that achieve a range of ecological benefits, water quality improvement, reducing erosion, increasing the complexity, connectivity, and quality of habitat. And we're looking at projects that improve native and natural habitat, benefit species of concern. Those could be from state wildlife action plans. Those could be from other priority species, increase biodiversity, and maintain healthy native populations. Invasive species control can be eligible for part of a comprehensive habitat restoration project, but you're not going to build your whole project around invasive species control. It'll be part of improving the habitat quality that you're looking at. Next. The second category is to expand nature-based solutions to improve stormwater storage. So we're talking about improving stormwater capture and storage and reducing runoff, addressing combined sewer overflows, basement backups, flooding. Competitive proposals will focus primarily on installation or maintenance of the nature-based solution. So here we're talking about creating stormwater wetlands, rain gardens, riparian buffers. And there's a priority for projects with a dual purpose, increasing stormwater storage, for example, while enhancing the quality of our access to or use of natural areas. Again, you have your overlap there between this category and the third category if your project goes that way. And eligible work includes installation, maintenance, and or improvement components. Next. The third category is to activate restored habitats and natural areas. There's a lot of different ways that this could look. Projects are looking to increase grantee capacity in this area to prioritize multiple benefits and encompass the following components. So there should be a habitat stewardship component to enhance long-term sustainable habitat stewardship. Again, that ties to thinking through your project as part of an ongoing effort that's going to be followed up on in the future. Examples could include adaptive management projects, invasive species control, direct and community engagement, increasing access to nature, activating restored areas through strategic direct community engagement. Benefits would be to public use, public health, accessibility, and/or recreation. So this could look like education opportunities in nature, conservation-oriented training or workforce development, volunteer and stewardship. And then increasing public access opportunities. So this could focus on improving infrastructure for public access and engagement in previously restored natural areas or habitats. You definitely want to focus over activation over beautification. So no just putting up infrastructure without a plan to engage folks in restoration and engagement and potentially education. For the first two categories, generally the timeline for those projects is 2 years. For this category, it would be 3 years or field seasons to increase the sustainability and long-term success of the project. And again, must be of sufficient size or scope or unique ecological value to necessitate reinvestment in the area. So here we're looking at examples would be trail construction, nature-based recreation, public access points, infrastructure, enabling the use of habitats for various types of communities. So there's a kind of a broad range of a menu of what you can put together here and combine with other project categories. Next slide. So we're going to focus on the key points of the narrative in this, the rest of this session. And I just wanted to kind of run through those project category types first, so that was fresh in your mind, because it's important to focus on what your key project area is and what those key outcomes are and how they're connected to the community, because otherwise you could sort of be in your mind writing 2 different proposals and you're not quite sure what to put in and what not to put in. So it's important to be clear what you're doing up front. And we're going to talk about these highlights of some of these areas that as they affect the narrative, the title, the description, the abstract, the funding category, as we touched on, the context, the outcomes and the activities, tracking, metrics, monitoring, and maintenance, and the project team and partnerships. Next. So the first impression would be obviously your title. You want to set a good first impression and make your title clear, descriptive, and engaging. So you may think, well, I'll have a title that says reducing stormwater runoff into the Calumet River through nature-based solution installation. And you may be able to focus that even more and get a clear picture in the reviewer's mind from the get-go if you considered revising it to reducing stormwater runoff and creating riparian habitat in rare ecosystems along the Calumet River in northwestern Indiana. If you did that, you'd be doing a lot of work in the title and already getting clear in the reviewer's mind where it is and what the nature-based solution is going to be and what it's going to do. Next. Next, we have an abstract. As we're going through the Easy Grants portal, you'll have those fields to fill in that aren't actually the narrative, but the narrative feeds into what you're going to be putting in those parts of the application on Easy Grants. So this abstract is your elevator pitch, so make it pithy, which hopefully you'll be able to do once you've clarified how you're going to focus on your project. How will your proposal stand out against the others? Is there any sort of special story about the habitat or the species or the community that you want to share with reviewers. And again, be clear about your project category with a primary category and then a secondary categories as you go along. Next. The project description, that'll reinforce your first impression. You want to provide the highest level overview of what you're doing. You want to help reviewers quickly understand how the proposed project advances the program priorities and goals. So what kind of habitat are you going to improve? How will connectivity be enhanced? What are the priority species and benefits? What specifically are the solutions that you're addressing for instance, stormwater capture and storage? And what kind of impact are you going to have in terms of quantity of stormwater saved? That makes for a pithy description. Next. Okay, so now we're diving into the narrative. So you want to sell the project to your reviewer. You want to assume that the reviewer knows nothing about your project and set the context for it. So I'm sure the reviewer is going to be familiar with what is going on in your region, but you want to clarify. You don't want to waste a lot of real estate in your proposal talking about big picture hazards and how they play out over the region. You want to really focus down on your geography and what it looks like for your geography and how that impacts why you decided to do what you wanted to do. So lay out the relevant challenges that you're facing and how the scale of your project will match that solution. And this takes a little thinking through and may take some time to sift through how you want to address this, but once you do that, it'll be really clear and it'll help you with the whole rest of the proposal. You want to describe how the project advances federal, state, tribal, regional, or local strategies or plans. Refer back to the Great Lakes Business Plan as you can, and definitely focus on the relevant metrics that will give you kind of a story of how your outcomes will look to the community and to the area. And we'll dive more into that later on the metrics. Next, partnerships. Think through partnerships and community impact. That's a very key component of this. There's a range of partners and stakeholders who can collaborate. Community members, community-based organizations, civic leaders, nonprofit organizations, educational institutions, state agencies, groups of these folks who are working together on different larger scale conservation and resilience issues. These partnerships are going to help with sustainability and success of the project and help integrate it into local programs and policies to give you that benefit of moving the resilience building and the conservation outcomes forward. And it's also going to help you raise the visibility of your project and promote community buy-in and engagement. Next. Amplification. NIFWIF often talks about wanting to hear about the transferability and the scalability of your project to understand how it can help advance goals across the region. So there's a couple of components that I have a phone ringing in the background. Can you all hear that? I can go get rid of it if it's annoying you. I'll just keep going. So the components of amplification and getting the word out about those, about your project and what it means are communication. So you want to include a strategy for notifying relevant communities and audiences about the project before, during, and after completion. So there's another component that you can weave into your narrative and your story. You want to explain how the project has the potential to catalyze additional efforts where they have not been already broadly deployed. And you can also share about transferability Do you have plans to transfer lessons learned to other communities and or be integrated into government programs or policies? And that's a really good thing to think up front in terms of the partnership building and how you're looking at your outcomes. Next. So when it all comes together, you want to be able to feel like you've addressed what all the reviewers are, what the reviewers are all going to be looking for in terms of the evaluation criteria. So you can basically think of it as 3 different categories. You have conservation outcomes, budget, and technical. And you can sit back and review your narrative after you've written it and see that you have gone through all these points that the reviewers will be looking at and going through and seeing if you address them. So we have alignment with program goals and priorities. Does the project contribute to the goals of the Great Lakes Business Plan? Do you have quantifiable performance metrics? Do you have a strong habitat enhancement, stormwater storage, or natural area activation components? How will outcomes be monitored? By whom and with what resources? Who are the partners and the stakeholders? Partnership and community impact. What communities are impacted? Does the project have a long-term sustainability? How will the outcomes be maintained? By whom and with what resources? And you may not know a lot of detail on that last one, but you can certainly paint a picture of how you see that the project goes forward in time. In the budget, which we're going to go into in more detail later, you want to make sure that your costs are allowable and reasonable, that you're aligning with all the instructions that you've gotten on the Easy Grant site. Your matching contributions, does your matching contributions show buy-in and support? Again, with the caveat that Aislinn said that if that's not something you're able to do a lot of, don't let that scare you away from applying. And cost effectiveness, does the budget balance performance, risk, and efficient use of the funds? So are you really asking for what you need and all of that is justified? We definitely want you to be able to put in what you're going to need for the project and clearly explain that. So for technical, we want to make sure that it's technically sound and feasible for it actually working out from a on the ground perspective, that you have a logical and achievable work plan and timeline, that you're engaging appropriate technical experts, either on your staff or with partners, that you're using accurate spatial data, that you have a sound compliance approach. We touched on this a little bit earlier, and we can talk more later about that, the permitting, the NEPA, the QAP, quality assurance project plan, which may not be necessary with your proposal, and QA/QC. Past grantee success. Are you building on something you've done? Can you talk about how you have the capacity to do this through prior grants? Or if you haven't gotten prior grants, then through other work that you've done. And the transferability, the amplification, those points that we talked about earlier. Next. So here's some red flags or some things that might confuse the reviewers that will kind of affect the impression that your proposal is making. Using too much technical jargon or too many buzzwords, providing too much background. Again, a context is really good and important, but using up too much space for the background isn't going to serve you because you're not going to have enough room for the other things you need to talk about. Don't embellish or change the template, obviously. Make sure that you have all your attachments, including your letters of support. Also clarify your match sources and your budget, and don't have budget items without justification. We want to make sure that if you are claiming a match, who exactly is providing it and what's the status of that? Do you have it? Do you think you'll have it? Have you applied for something, a grant that you may get in the time frame? And again, vague project outcomes. even if you have metrics, you may still be a little bit unclear about what you're actually going to get out of the project when you're done. Next. Letters of support. As we've mentioned before, we want to demonstrate buy-in. You want to show that partners are on board. You want to engage landowners, especially if you're considering projects on private land. And you want to dispel any concerns that you think might have been raised in the narrative about your project, your ability to do it, your success of the project. Here's a chance to have others weigh in on their knowledge of the situation and how they believe that those concerns can be addressed, or that they aren't going to be of concern. So you want to make sure that the letters of support are project specific. If you have a range of different types of partners or supporters, that's very helpful. And they need to be on letterhead and signed so that we know they're officially letters. And of course, you always have to remember to upload them and not just intend to upload them. So something to put on your checklist. And then, of course, it's always good once you're done with the narrative to keep up a good first impression, is to make sure that you have another set of eyes look at your proposal, at least one other, if not more, for grammar, spelling, tone, flow. Does it communicate what you think it communicates? You want to do the format, the headers, bullet, and spacing in the requested format on the form. So don't delete the instructions on that form. There's an option if you would like to use digital tools to spell check AI wisely and critically, if you want to see if you feel like you're answering all the questions based on what you're required to put in the application. And am I meeting the Chi-Cal Rivers Fund program requirements? And if you're not, what would you recommend for making it stronger? Next. Submitting by Easy Grants, through Easy Grants. Save your documents frequently. Upload all the required attachments. Double check for errors in the required fields, the ones that have the red asterisk in them, and certainly contact the help desk for help with tech issues. And it's always best to try to submit early so that you can get help from either the help desk or the Fish and Wildlife Foundation or anyone who can help you answer the particular question you have. And I think is that it? No, we have another pulling us back to the higher level, thinking about what you should be remembering to check for. Clarity is important. Align with the funder priorities. So reframe accordingly to the highest relevant co-benefits that have the most impact. Sell the reviewer on your project, develop compelling narratives, and proofreading copy edit. You don't want that to distract from the confidence that you've shown in your proposal already. So I think that's it. Next slide. There we are. Okay, I think we had some questions.
Perfect. Sally, I can read these off to you. I think most of these are coming right from the content that you just presented.
Okay.
Let's see. So the first one here is, could this proposal cover costs for shovel-ready site plans for a river overlook on the Cook County Forest Preserve site at Whistler Woods and the refurbishment of the mural over the Little Cal-Sag River Bridge? If yes, what category? So we've already got a solid answer in the chat on this one. So maybe for the sake of time, I won't read this whole answer. But if this question interests you, I'll say there is a thorough answer from Aislinn over at the Fish and Wildlife Foundation on this question in the chat. If any pieces of this feel relevant to anyone on the call.
Yes, there's a very, very good answer in the chat.
A good answer to a very specific question, but I'm sure there are a lot of takeaways for other folks who are dealing with similar issues. Next one is for you, Sally. The term activation has been used a couple of times. Can you define it?
Yeah, so activation is to encourage engagement and use of lands. So we want to take these restored sites and increase access and increase engagement with communities on these lands. So there's a range of activities that could be, but the goal is to engage the public, engage particular communities with various activities. Could be educational, could be recreation, could be stewardship, could be all three. So that's basically what it is.
Yeah, the active piece of activation is important there.
Yeah.
All right, let's see if anyone else has questions on any of the content up until this point. As folks are maybe just hitting enter and putting those into the chat, or if anyone wants to jump off mute. See if we have any more before we go into our break here. I think maybe we're running a couple minutes off, but pretty dang close to schedule. Maybe we will plan to start back up at we'll do 11 on the nose, if that makes sense for folks, just to give everyone a full 10-minute break. So we'll do that. We'll meet back here at 11. And in the meantime, I do just want to flag for everyone that we have an attendee survey that we're asking folks to complete, hopefully by the end of this session. That way you can just get it done and not have to worry about it after this workshop's over. So there's a QR code here. There's a link that I can also put into the chat. But really, this is just a short survey. It should take no more than 2 or 3 minutes, just to get some input on everything that you're hearing this afternoon, this morning. So please take a couple minutes to take a look at this, and we will be back here at 11 a.m. To pick up with our next session. Thanks, everybody. You do not have to leave the Zoom. You can just go on mute and off camera, and we'll be back shortly. In the meantime, or if you're having any issues with the survey, feel free to unmute and we can discuss. All right, folks, we are at the top of the hour, so we are going to get started again here. Chris, if we can go to the next slide, we are going to kick off our third session out of 4. This next one we're calling the 3 M's. It's focused on metrics, monitoring, and maintenance, the technical pieces of the proposal. And I will pass it off to who really is the 4th M, Max, if you want to pick back up, and session is yours.
Thanks, Kyle. Okay, welcome back, everybody. So yeah, we're going to start by diving in a little more to metrics. So I know we've touched on these briefly already. But yeah, I want to spend a little more time touching on these because it is an important part of your proposal and your project. So picking the right metrics is an important part of your proposal process. You're going to be required to report on your project accomplishments over time in terms of the metrics that are selected, at the outset of the project. So you want to make sure you're picking the metrics that can best show project success. So Easy Grants has a list of metrics that you'll be able to choose from for reporting. And yeah, just want to run through what those metrics are at the start. So on the slides here, we've broken them out by category. So, some of these metrics are going to be very well aligned with one of the 3 funding categories of Chi-Cal, but you are able to select metrics, outside of the one funding category that is your priority area. You want to select all the metrics that apply and that you're going to be able to show, quantifiable progress on over the course of your project. So there's a range of habitat and ecosystem metrics. So for restoration, there's metrics for riparian, floodplain, in-stream, and wetland restoration, measured in miles and acres restored and number of structures installed. There are fish passage improvements metrics, measured in number of passage barriers rectified and miles of streams opened. There's also a removal of invasives metric, measured in acres of vegetation restored, erosion control, measured in pounds of sediment avoided annually, and water quality, measured in pounds of nitrogen and phosphorus avoided. And go to the next slide. And then there are a few nature-based infrastructure metrics. So there's stormwater storage, measured in volume added annually. And I'll just flag that if you are selecting the nature-based infrastructure funding category, the stormwater storage metric is required. So you have to select this as one of your metrics if that is your funding category. And there's also a metric for nature-based solution infrastructure, measured in total area of that infrastructure, number of trees planted, miles of trails developed, a number of access points developed or improved. And then lastly, we have our community and economic metrics. So there's volunteer participation, measured in number of volunteer hours, outreach and technical assistance, measured in number of people reached, and economic benefits, number of jobs created and or sustained. So I encourage folks, as you're working through your application, to take a look at the RFP metrics section. The RFP has a table with all of these metrics laid out. It has the the project activity, the associated metric of how that activity is measured, and also it has an additional guidance column. And you want to pay attention to that additional guidance column because many of these metrics have some info that they request in the metrics notes section of your application. So as you're inputting these metrics that you're selecting into Easy Grants, you'll have an opportunity to add notes in your application. And those metric notes are really important. Reviewers look closely at those. And some of these metrics have metric note items that you're asked to provide. So for example, if you're selecting the volume of stormwater storage added metric, in the notes section, you'll be asked to include the design retention capacity of that nature-based solution and indicate the method or model that you use to estimate that stormwater storage added total. So you want to make sure that if there's information that's asked of you in the metrics notes section, that you're providing that for reviewers. Next slide. So next, going into monitoring. So your applications will be asked to include a monitoring plan talking about how you'll monitor progress both during and after the implementation of your project to track success. So that monitoring plan, you want to make sure it's talking about how you plan to measure your project outcomes and assess the success of your project. You can discuss this right in the proposal narrative portion of your application, or provide a monitoring plan as an upload. And that monitoring plan should, at baseline, be talking about the metrics that you'll be using to track project progress and quantify your outcomes. You'll also want it to outline your approach for, what baseline conditions you'll be using to compare your post-implementation conditions, and also talking about your plans and resources for monitoring and maintenance post-implementation of your project. And then long-term sustainability. So this is the last M, maintenance. Reviewers want to see that, and NIFWF wants to see that your project will be able to be maintained over time to ensure that those benefits are locked in and sustained over time. So as a grantee, you'll be required to present or develop a plan that addresses site operation and management needs for at least 5 years after project completion. In that maintenance plan, you'll want to talk about what maintenance and what actions are needed to keep your site maintained, any ownership of equipment that you'll need to maintain the project site, any cost estimates of what that maintenance will cost over time, and highlighted here, plans for how future funding will be secured to implement necessary long-term monitoring and maintenance. That's an important one. And you also want to talk about any long-term partners and parties who are responsible for any implementation of long-term maintenance. So yeah, there's a suite of things that you'll want to talk about in that maintenance plan, but with the main goal of showing that your project is sustainable over the long term. Next slide. And so this is that evaluation criteria table that Sally walked through a little bit, but just wanted to highlight some of those key things on this table, that kind of touch on how metrics, monitoring, and maintenance will be evaluated by reviewers. So the blue highlights here are kind of showing key areas of the proposal with strong intersections with the 3 M's that we've walked through. So quantifiable performance metrics, this we touched on. Your reviewers are going to look at both the metrics that you select and the actual, quantification of those metrics that you're outlining in your proposal. So you want to select metrics that you're going to be able to show strong quantifiable progress in over the course of your project. And reviewers will also look at this in terms of, cost effectiveness, and that allowable and reasonable cost item is highlighted under budget as well. Project long-term sustainability, so that monitoring and maintenance plan will be, key in showing that your project is sustainable over the long term. And then on the technical side, most of these are applicable for the 3 M's. You want to, be sure that you're using, accurate data in your quantification, that your monitoring and maintenance plans are technically sound, logical, and achievable. So these highlights are here just so, just so you can keep in mind, that reviewers are going to be, looking at those 3 M's closely, and this kind of maps that to the evaluation criteria. Okay, I believe this is our last slide here, so I'm happy to answer any questions that folks have about, about those slides that we just walked through.
Awesome, thanks, Max. So we do have one question in the chat for you. It's asking you to talk a bit more about metrics for invasives management and native planting for areas that have previously received Chi-Cal funding for habitat restoration. And the question is this best listed as habitat acres enhanced, meaning for improved diversity of plant communities? So can you talk a little bit more about the metrics for invasives?
Yeah, so, there's a couple that are applicable here, and you might be selecting multiple metrics to touch on your work. So there is a removal of invasives metric measured in acres restored. So, where you'll enter the number of acres of invasives restored, and in the metrics notes for that, you'll want to specify the type of vegetation that was removed, the average frequency of future treatment, and whether removed vegetation will be left on site to compose. So that's certainly one metric that you might want to look at for invasives management. But also, likely some of the habitat metrics would apply for you as well under that category. So depending on what type of ecosystem you're working in, riparian, floodplain, wetlands, you can pick the applicable ecosystem type, and some of those metrics might be worth taking a look at as well to touch on the miles or acres restored there. So those are a couple that come to mind off the top of my head, but yeah, Kyle, if you have any other recommendations there.
No, I think that makes sense. Everything you just said, Max, I think it does come down to land area. So there are a couple of different ways that you can get there to get to, acres enhanced, acres of invasives removed, acres controlled. But essentially they're all interrelated. So I think your explanation there was good.
Awesome.
There's all,
Sally,
I just want to jump in for a second. There's also a nature-based infrastructure number of trees planted. So depending on whether that's applicable, that could address the specific planting part of the question, if that's applicable.
Yep. Yeah, I think like Max was saying, each project's going to be different, and there are different metrics that are out there. So I think folks would want to look at the options that are on the table and pick whatever collection of metrics fit their project specifically. Let's see here. We've got another question about a list of calculators that ShyCal likes to help folks figure out stormwater stored over acreage. Aislinn from NIFWF responded that the RFP does list a few resources you could consider to assist with the calculation, but you're also welcome to consult a local expert. So NIFWF has some resources, but that's not the only method of getting towards that total amount of stormwater storage. Max, there's a question for you about transferability. Can you define that a bit more?
Yeah, so that's down here on this slide at the bottom of the technical column under evaluation criteria. So transferability is something that can be an added bonus to your ShyCal project or NIFWF projects in general. Reviewers love projects that where the outcomes or the lessons learned or the strategies used in a particular project could be applicable to a nearby community, geography, et cetera, that might benefit from performing a similar project. So if there's aspects of your project that might benefit other nearby communities, this is something that reviewers look at as transferability. Are the outcomes and lessons learned from a particular project able to be transferred to nearby project sites.
Awesome. Thanks, Max.
Yeah.
And I did just put in the links to both calculators that were mentioned. So the stormwater calculator that we already talked about. And there was another question that came up about calculators for tree coverage. There is one that's specifically called out in the RFP known as iTree. So that link is in the chat now, and it is in the RFP. But again, there are other methods that folks can use if you want to work with a consultant, or if there are other calculators out there that you prefer. You should just note that in your response. All right, any other questions on metrics, monitoring, or maintenance before we move on? Okay, if not, Max, I will say thank you. And we're going to move on to the final session here before our breakout rooms that I will be covering. And this is titled The Art of Persuasion, Showcasing Value and Financials Clearly. So this is all about budgeting and the financial pieces of your proposals. So we can go to the next slide here. So the budget is really a key piece of your application. As we mentioned earlier around the conversation related to match, match the budget. Those are pieces that are evaluated and evaluated seriously when reviewers look at your proposals, but they're not the only piece. So this is a big piece of the pie, but it's not the only one. But it is worth putting some time and energy towards a solid budget that has all of the pieces of the budget considered, and really rounding that out to make sure that reviewers know your project is not just effective on the scientific side of things, but is also cost efficient and sound when it comes to work plan and budget. So there are several different components and requirements for a sound budget. Specifically, we were looking for a detailed budget that has line items itemized and explained in the budget template that you'll see in Easy Grants. That we'll have a little bit more information on what is included in the budget on the next slide, but the budget itself is a core piece of this. On top of that, there's also the budget narrative, and that's where you can explain any of the costs that are listed as line items in your budget. Specifically, if there are costs that maybe are not clear at face value, the narrative is a spot where you'll want to explain in a little bit more detail why that cost is there, why it's the amount that it is. If you're bringing in volunteers and paying them a specific amount through a stipend, you might want to explain that. If there's anything that could be questionable or could be viewed by the reviewers as a red flag or a yellow flag, this is your time in the budget section to explain that to the reviewers directly so that they're not left wondering and filling those gaps in on their own, because that could confuse folks and ultimately that could lead to a lower score on the budget section. Also, you want to make sure that you're staying in compliance with all of the uniform guidance coming out of the Office of Management and Budget. And then, of course, you want to avoid any prohibited costs, things like advocacy, research projects, marketing, land acquisition. Those just are not eligible for this program and many of NIFLIF's programs. So you'll want to make sure that you review that section on prohibited costs and don't include any of that in your budget, because that could be a bit of a hiccup that you can easily avoid. So we can go to the next slide here to break down what the budget actually entails. So there are several different categories that you'll want to consider here, starting with salaries and benefits. So this is where you're actually listing out personnel, and you will itemize this person by person with information like staff time, the person's position on staff, their salary, how many hours they expect to spend on the project, what their hourly rate and level of engagement is. Then you'll do the math and see what that salary for the project is. And then you'd include some information about fringe benefits as well. So you will itemize personnel costs, going into the details, the fine details there, to make sure that folks who are reviewing the proposal have a good understanding of who is working on this, what's the level of their engagement, and what does that actually mean when it comes to costs. There's also sections on travel, whether that's ground travel, site by site, airfare, trains, mileage, you name it. Sections about, meals and incidental expenses when it comes to per diem, lodging, everything that becomes associated with travel. There's a whole section about that. There are sections about equipment, materials, and supplies. And here is where you might want to look at some of the information that NIFLIF publicizes in the RFP and then in some of the frequently asked questions or the fact sheets that are behind the scenes. There's a difference between equipment and materials. There are certain cost thresholds there. So you'll just want to understand that as you're moving forward and making sure that the costs that you put forward in those two categories are sound and in line with what NIFLIF typically expects to see. Moving along, there's also a section for contractual services. So if you plan on contracting out any of the work through your proposal, this is where you would put that information. NIFLIF does require that if you're contracting with a consulting firm or a private company, that there's some type of competitive solicitation to get those consulting services on contract. So whether that's been done in the past or whether you plan to do that moving forward, you just need to demonstrate that that competitive solicitation has happened or that it will happen. So if you already plan on listing out a contractor or an engineering firm that your town or your nonprofit goes back to time and time again, you will at some point have to show that you competitively solicited those services so that it's in line with NIFLIF requirements. And then lastly, there are other sections for other direct costs and other indirect costs, things like an indirect rate, maybe a pre-approved micro rate, There are sections for all of that. So collectively, this will make up your budget. And as you're putting together this budget, you want to remain competitive. You want to make sure that costs are staying low, but you also want to make sure that you're accounting for miscellaneous costs that could increase the budget. And those are not always bad things. Really, I think what NIFWF is looking for is the most accurate budget that you can provide. So if you plan on offering stipends to volunteers, if you plan on hosting workshops or need money for travel or materials, if there are costs associated with monitoring, for some NIFWF programs, when the funding comes from EPA, there's a requirement for a QAP plan, or Quality Assurance Performance Plan. Those cost time and they cost money, and they need staff to complete those plans. But those are also plans that can be included in a budget with dollars set aside for that planning specifically. So if anything like this, if you expect these miscellaneous costs to come up, account for them. That's okay to add into your budget. NIFWF wants to see those things accurately accounted for, and it's definitely harder to add them after the fact. So including it up front tends to be better. So next slide here. So when it comes to drafting a budget, there are some tips here just to keep in mind as you start to get into this phase of the proposal. Again, you want to make sure that your budget is supporting what you're already putting on paper when it comes to the narrative. So these should go hand in hand. The problem that you're identifying, the proposed solutions, and the actions that you plan to take should all be supported by the budget and vice versa. So you'll want to make sure that you're accurately listing the staff, the consultants, partners, the materials, and really any of the resources, whether those are physical resources or personnel, that you need to get the job done. All right, and they really should inform what's happening in the proposal, and it shouldn't go beyond what you're listing in terms of proposal activities. When you're coming up with costs, obviously these costs should be realistic, they should be relevant to the project, and they should be well researched. So a good example of this comes up with volunteer time. If you are bringing in volunteers and you're looking to pay them a stipend for their support, that is definitely something that's doable with NIFWF funding, but that volunteer time should be well researched and informed based on the activities that those volunteers are carrying out. So a good example would be, if you're bringing high school students in to do a beach cleanup, the level of rigor or the labor that's required there may not necessarily be valued at the same as a tree planting or volunteers coming in and hosting a community workshop with a lot of engagement required. So consider that as you're putting together your costs and your budget, and just make sure that the dollars and the estimates that you're using are informed, they're well researched. Maybe that's through preliminary engineering designs. Maybe you've contacted several different firms and you've received quotes. There are ways to get those costs, but just make sure that they're sound and each line item is justified. There's also no need to reinvent the wheel here. NIFWF puts forward a template and a format for its budget. Leave it as is. That's really your easiest approach there, is to take the template that they've given you and just fill it out. Really no need to adjust very much. And if there are areas where you feel like additional information is needed, that's what the budget narrative can be for. So we can go to the next slide here. Next, we want to talk about match. So we mentioned earlier that for this specific funding program, the Shycow Rivers Fund, match is not required, but it is strongly encouraged. I really like talking about match because it's not just about the funding part of it. Match is possibly one of the best ways to show buy-in from all of the partners that are at the table on a project. So not just the lead applicant, but other partner organizations. So if you're a nonprofit and you're conducting planning on behalf of 5 municipalities in your service area, bringing all of those municipalities to the table as partners, potentially with cash match or in-kind match from some of their staff members, that's a great way to show buy-in from all of the partners and to show that everybody has a stake in the game when it comes to this project's success. So ask yourself, are all of the partners and the beneficiaries contributing? And is there a way for you to be more creative with the sources of match that you're bringing to the table? Oftentimes, these projects are being done in communities that just don't have the resources to provide cash match on a project. And that's okay. There might be ways to better calculate or more accurately calculate the resources that are being spent on a project, whether that's staff time or volunteer time, to make sure that the values that you're putting forward are accurate and that you are accounting for all the materials that you're using, the facilities that you're temporarily using, don't sell yourself short when it comes to this portion of the proposal. Accurately accounting for those things can help with the cost efficiency argument for your application. And again, match is one piece that's being evaluated, but the stronger that argument is, the more favorable your overall proposal becomes. So take that into account. And if anyone wants to talk more about potential sources of match, we can do that in the breakout rooms. Keep in mind that match can be cash, it can be in kind, it can be materials, it can be staff time, volunteer time. It does have to be non-federal though. Something important to note. So we're looking at funds that originate outside of the federal process. If there are federal funds that are activated for your project that are relevant, you can still list those as federal leverage, but those would not count as match, and they're not considered in the exact same way. That's more along the lines of, what does this project do to activate investments across the federal government as opposed to actually being matched. We can go to the next slide here. Okay, so some just helpful guidance for folks to know as they're thinking through their proposal. You really want to make sure that you know the funder's priorities and how your project helps them with their return on investment. Overall, that's what funders are looking for. They want to make sure that dollars that they're putting on the ground are as effective as possible. So take that into account. This isn't just your project, it's their project as well. If you need some support, maybe your organization is having a little bit of a harder time coming up with the budget and putting the match together. Maybe there are partners, whether they're formal partners on the project or just other organizations that you work with and trust. Talk to their finance teams and troubleshoot, ask questions, brainstorm opportunities to make your budget in your match sections more compelling for reviewers. Again, look at templates and examples that are put out there and leave plenty of time for review so that this portion does not feel like an afterthought. You want reviewers leaving your proposal thinking that the budget was sound and thought through. Some mistakes to avoid include misalignment with the proposal. Again, you want to make sure that you understand the priorities and that the project that you're putting on the ground and that you're hoping to get funding for is actually advancing NIFWF priorities. You want to avoid any vague or generic descriptions. Use that budget narrative section to your advantage and make sure that you're being specific with any details that you're providing. You want to make sure that you're not leaving out matching funds and that you are including all of your in-kind match, that you're really just calculating things accurately. Avoid basic arithmetic errors. Double check, use a calculator, take that time for review and use it wisely because that could, again, just cause a hiccup that you don't need. And that could inadvertently leave a flag for reviewers that maybe there's a lack of capacity. And of course, you want to make sure that you're not ignoring reporting or compliance costs. Again, you can budget those in and use that time wisely. So we can go to the next slide here, and I think that is our last one. So before we transition to breakout rooms, I just want to see if there are any questions on the financial section. And I think we have several that were put in the chat here. So let me pull this back up. Let's see. So someone asked, part of my community access would include citizen science. Is reporting about our bird or bat monitoring a prohibited part of the project? We had NIFWF response saying this would be encouraged. We love monitoring for species response. And would equipment for animal monitoring be allowed? I think the broad answer is yes or maybe. I think it depends on the project specifically. But monitoring expenses are allowed, as if NIFWF said, and you could consider that in your budget. Let's see. We have a link for the Great Lake business plan that we can put in the chat. The foundation still is operating off of the 2015 business plan, so that is correct. And then a question about if staff time is partially covered with the grant, could uncovered staff time be listed as in-kind match? Yes, that's a great example of in-kind match. Maybe some portions are covered and some are not, and definitely account for those portions that are not. Has NIFWF ever considered modifying the salary auto calculations for organizations that do not have a 40-hour work week? The 40-hour work week assumption requires us to change hours or salaries to accommodate the FTE intended. Aislinn and Tracy, I might toss that one to you. Is that something that NIFWF has considered?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking this question. I was typing feverishly, but it's probably easier just to speak. So at present, the Easy Grant system obviously does not include that flexibility. I hear you that that's a big challenge, and I'm sorry that it's that way. We have considered ways to make, well, as many ways as possible to make our grant system as flexible as it can be, because we understand that not everyone's organization is structured the same way. At this time, we cannot afford that accommodation. So unfortunately, what we would encourage you to do is to sort of make those arithmetic adjustments on your end so that the calculator works. I know that it's hard navigating that budget system this way. So we want to help if we can, but we're kind of stuck. In future, we're hoping to onboard a new grants management system that might be able to include some more adjustments on the budget side. So fingers crossed in the coming years, we'll be able to be more flexible.
Awesome. Thank you, Aislinn. All right, well, I don't see any new questions here, so I think we're going to transition to breakout rooms. I'm going to let Chris kind of give us the rundown on how these will work, and then we will jump right in.
Okay, thanks, Kyle. At this point, we are going to give everyone the opportunity to select a breakout room. We have 3 breakout rooms organized by topic: financials, proposal narrative, and the 3 M's. And we will have a Throwe staffer and a NIFWIF representative in each of the rooms. You will have the ability to join a room and then exit and join another room if you like after your questions have been answered. Let's see. This is a great opportunity for you to present your proposal ideas, get some feedback from your peers or from field liaison or NIFWIF staff, and discuss any potential improvements with those folks. And you do not need to return to the main room after the breakout room session has finished. We will conclude the workshop. With that being said, let me just advance to a few additional slides for your information. The field liaison team at Throwe Environmental would love to offer the opportunity to meet with our staff if you want to take this conversation or pursue your idea a little bit further. There's a meeting link right here. If you want to grab this QR code, we can also put the link in the chat for you, where you can set up an appointment with our team. So we invite you to book those office hours with us if you like. And for any questions you think of after the fact, as Kyle mentioned at the beginning of the workshop, we will be sharing the recording and a copy of the slides after we've concluded. But any questions you have afterwards, please feel free to contact me, and I will make sure your question gets answered or forwarded to the appropriate team member. And keep an eye out for these links in the chat as well. So I am going to open the breakout rooms here in a second, and I'll hang tight to make sure everyone sees the link where to do that. I've just opened the 3 rooms. If you do not see them immediately on your screen, check for more. There should be 3 dots that says more. And as you should see that the ability to select a room there. Please feel free to unmute and ask if you're having any difficulties. But at this point, please go ahead and choose a room, and we'll be checking in momentarily.